Good morning.
Good morning, Steven.
Hi, this is Steven. I'm with Shelley Rugg today. And I hope everybody's having a lovely afternoon. It's beautiful out there today.
Yes, it is a beautiful day. And so this is Let's Talk, and it's a call-in show. And we really encourage those of you who are listening to call in and contribute to this conversation that we're going to have today about... What are we talking about today, Steven?
You know, we're changing our format a little bit. Paul's on vacation, and we're having some invited guests come in and join us. Today we're having Sky Nelson Isaac coming in. He's written a book called Living in the Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World. And
nice.
He comes at this as a physicist. He wears a lot of hats. He's a public speaker, an author, a musician, and happens to be a physicist in quantum mechanics, and I'm not going to talk about what that is because I really don't know enough, but from what I understand, it's the understanding of small particles, little things, protons and neutrons, really small stuff. But what's interesting about it, and we're going to talk to Sky about that, is that Sky is looking to quantum mechanics as a way of coordinating this with our behavior, the choices we make, and the things we do, and how they affect us. I think for me that's going to be very interesting to hear how that connects.
Yeah.
For you too?
Yeah. No, I really like this topic, and I'm looking forward to when Sky calls in so we can learn more about it and how the physics piece fits in with what can feel like a magical moment, right?
You know, I'm just going to pull something out of his book. It says, "Is the universe a friendly place?" Amazingly, I believe this is a question that physics can tackle. Physics can tackle whether or not the universe is a friendly place. The theory I will present, based on some well-established science as well as some new science and some speculative ideas, states that the universe is neither friendly, hostile, nor indifferent to us. Rather, it is responsive.
All right.
That makes sense to me.
Well, you know, I'll just share a little story. I had an experience, you know, just today. I went to yoga as usual, and after yoga, I was walking to my car on Mesa Drive, and somebody else had just pulled up to park. And it was the fella who distributes West Marin reviews. And we need some at Gallery Route 1. And he said, "Hey, I've got some reviews in my car." And I said, "Hey, I need some." And moments later, we were at the gallery, and I had what I needed, and it was all just such perfect timing. So it looks like Sky has just called in. Sky, are you there?
Hi there. Good
Hi,
to
Sky.
hear from you.
Welcome to the show. Thanks for calling in.
You know,
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Before we start, I just want to let everybody know that Sky grew up here. He's a local boy, lived in Inverness. Is that right?
Both Inverness Park and Point Reyes Station on the Mesa.
Okay.
Sort of all over town, you know.
So I just wanted to mention that. Why don't you explain, I already announced what your book is, and maybe you'll tell us a little bit about what's going on, what you mean by synchronicity and in the flow.
And before you start, Sky, I want to let the listeners know the number to call in if you'd like to get in on this conversation or ask Sky any questions. The number is 415-663-8492. All right, let's jump into this.
I wrote a manuscript in 2011, which was about my work on synchronicity. I got involved studying synchronicity in my, early 20s when I started to realize that a lot of the experiences I had that I couldn't explain, that felt kind of like spiritual in nature, I didn't necessarily want to turn to something I couldn't explain, like a divine being that's, giving me things or deciding on my life. I wanted to understand from a scientific perspective how these experiences, which I would call synchronicity, showed up. Synchronicities are meaningful coincidences. It's like those moments when life aligns in a way that's really relevant and matches what we're thinking about or going through in life.
Right.
The timing of a difficult experience, maybe the timing of an illness, or the timing of a car breaking down, or a positive experience, the timing of running into somebody at the right time in your life, or how you met your loved ones, your spouse, for instance, when you first met them. All of those things have a certain timing to them that speaks to the way that our lives are being woven together in the world. And so I wanted to understand that process from a scientific perspective, because I felt that there must be some kind of better explanation than just, there's random chance and anything that can happen will eventually happen, and if you get lucky, it might be you.
Aha.
It seems that synchronicity, as opposed to coincidence, really comes from a deeper source. It's not just chance, and it's not just lucky, but there's something else happening there. So what's going on there? What's this deeper thing that's going on? It's not luck.
There's a process that I call meaningful history selection. So we'll dive into what that means, meaningful history selection. Essentially saying that there are many possible branches of the way life could go. Like, imagine life like a big tree, an enormous tree, complicated tree with many, many, many branches. And you're always moving through that tree depending on what kinds of choices you make in your life. You go down this branch because you decided to go to the store on this particular day, or you go down a different branch because you decided to stay home and do your work that day. And those lead to different outcomes, and they're mutually exclusive, right? I either go to the store or I stay home and work, and these are two different things. On one of those branches, I might bump into somebody at the store. On the other branch, I might have an experience with my work that's kind of like a breakthrough. And I started asking myself this question, like, if I hadn't gone to the store, I wouldn't have met so-and-so, and we wouldn't have had this experience that was really meaningful. Mm-hmm. But if I hadn't have stayed home and worked, I wouldn't have had this breakthrough with my work that was really meaningful. So how do I make the right choice?
Sounds like they're both right choices.
Right, and that's a loaded question, you know? I really struggle with that experience of how do I make the right choice when each choice seems to lead to something important.
At my age, I'm 73, so I have a chance to look back and see some of the choices I've made. And, I mean, the bigger ones, like, well, why did I get together? Why did I ask this woman out for a drink? I mean, that makes all the difference in the world if you make one choice or another in terms of who you're going to commit your life to. These are huge choices, and I have to admit that when I was younger, I really wasn't paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, for me, I think that's the key, is that in the paying attention is when we can really see the things that show up that give us the cues about which path to take.
Yeah, and this is exactly where flow becomes relevant. Because the work I do is not just about noticing the synchronicities, noticing the choices that you make and the meaningful connections to what you experience from that. It's also being able to flow with that. So if we're totally unconscious of what opportunities are coming our way, like I've been unconscious about certain patterns that I have that have kind of soured professional relationships here and there, and I've started to notice that because it's an unconscious set of patterns that I do. And I'm trying to learn from that by becoming more conscious and not doing the same patterns. At the same time, by being overly cognizant of every choice and trying to think through everything, like what could this possibly mean? Is this person my life partner, and should I be asking them out on a date? I think that gets in the way of being successfully navigating this as well. So flow is this state that the researcher Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote about, which he described as transcending the worry about control. So if in life we're bouncing back and forth between taking as much control as we can to make sure things go right, and then we might bounce to the other end of the spectrum where we're surrendering control because it's like nothing's working, I'm just throwing up my hands in the air.
Right.
Things will fall wherever they fall. Those are both on this spectrum of like, how am I going to control life to get what I want? Because even when I throw my hands in the air, I'm still hoping, I'm doing that so that I hope God or somebody will take over and make it work for me. I still want things to work out. And flow is about transcending that, and it's what kids do when they're playing. And it's what we can do in these important decisions is like just immerse ourselves wholeheartedly into life, being aware of what's happening, paying attention to life, and also realizing that we're not in control and being willing to have fun and play with it.
Is this like letting go?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, if we just let go completely, we might not have any kind of initiative. So flow, the beautiful thing about flow is it's not a prescription for a specific way to live. It is different in every moment. Sometimes I have to let go of my attachment to how things were going to go, and sometimes I have to stand up for my perspective. And it really differs from case to case.
Gosh, so you dove in deep to find the scientific rationale for things that most humans recognize, happens in their life periodically. This, the happy circumstance of being in the same place at the same time, or whatever. Was that hard for you to navigate, like how to get into the flow if you know so much about how it all works? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, Richard Feynman said this great quote that I love. If you think of a flower and you don't know what a flower is, you just know that it's beautiful and you smell it and it smells great, but you don't know anything scientifically about it. That's, one way of perceiving the world. And then if you know everything about it scientifically, but you don't appreciate it, it's another way of looking at the world. But what he was trying to point out is that just as a scientist, if we want to learn something about the world, if we learn about how a flower works and we still appreciate it, it can actually give us more appreciation.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to reduce it to numbers on a page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You still have to stick your nose in it?
Yeah, you still have to stick your nose in it, but the numbers on the page don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So I think that for me, it's both an academic study, because I do research and publish academic research on it. And I think that understanding how it works and practicing it are both important. The more we understand it, the more we can see patterns showing up in our life, and I can see my own role in those patterns, and then I can kind of make changes in myself if I'm alert enough. And at the same time, I have to practice by being wholeheartedly in my life. It's not just about understanding, but also about feeling. Feeling is a big part of this work. Our feelings are part of what are guiding the synchronicities that come our way. And so part of a way to live in flow and to get more synchronicity coming into life is to really be aware of and honest with ourselves about what our feelings are and let them come through us.
You are listening to KWMR. This is Let's Talk, and we're talking with Sky Nelson about synchronicity and living in flow. And I'm excited to get into this discussion about feelings, emotions. If you are listening and you'd like to get in on this conversation, the number to call is 415-663-8492. So being able to understand your feelings is, I think, it can be a problem for people in America. There's a lot of people who don't quite understand, recognize the feelings they're having for what they are, and then how to process those feelings.
Yeah, and I really want to break it down to really simple terms. Like, we all live our life based on our feelings. It's a sense that we have. So I can't even choose where to go out to dinner without having a feeling. Mm-hmm. I can't choose what I want to do in the afternoon, whether I want to watch TV, go to a sports game, take a jog, or sit on the couch. All of those things bring up feelings, and if I like that feeling, then I want to do that thing. So I'm not suggesting that we need to be always paying attention to, how someone made us feel in a conversation. Like, that might drag us down and take up too much time and too much, processing power to be, reacting to everything that happens. But recognizing when a conversation happens, like at work, and then we walk away and half an hour later we realize we're just not focused and we're not effective, and we're something's going on inside of ourselves that's stopping us from being able to really be at our best, oftentimes for me, something happened which triggered sort of an inner dialogue that I'm kind of unaware of. And by being able to be more aware of, oh, yeah, this person said something about our plans for the weekend, and it made me kind of angry or scared for what's going to happen, or disappointed in what the plans were or whatever it might be. And when those things come up, when we can actually let those sensations into our body, we don't have to process it, with our mind, but we can actually feel what it feels like. Oh, yeah, I'm disappointed. And actually feel that disappointment in our body as a physical sensation. It then allows us to see that that's happening and then make a different choice. Or see, oh, yeah, I'm feeling disappointed because I keep having the same letdown, and it's a bummer. But now I'm not controlled by that anymore. And I
get that.
Make different choices.
Sure. There are lots of burdens we carry, and there are our own burdens. And regret, for example, or feeling that retribution. These are things that we don't have to carry. And am I talking about the same stuff?
Yeah, that's it. And I think that these things that we carry cause us to anticipate how the world's going to be. They cause us to anticipate how our relationship's going to go, or anticipate how a night out is going to go, because we are constantly beings of feeling and experience and thoughts. We're constantly anticipating what it is that we want or don't want to happen. And that's what's bringing in these experiences that I call synchronicity, which are aligned with our choices. So when we carry around these burdens, we're actually focused on these experiences that we don't want to have. And one thing we can do is start to be aware of that and drop those burdens and potentially have less of those situations showing up recurring in our life.
Easier said than done, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a practice that I do which tries to uncover that, because if we're constantly anticipating the same kind of, I've been disappointed before, I'm probably going to be disappointed again, then we might be experiencing a recurring circumstance. Every relationship has the same pattern, and it's different people, but it's the same pattern. So a couple of steps that you can take in this situation are to identify the recurring situation, to name a couple of examples of that situation. Oh, yeah, this happened with so-and-so, and it happened with so-and-so, and it happened at my work this time. And remember those situations and write them down. And then really dive into, what's the feeling? What's the inner experience I have when these things happen, these recurring sort of negative experiences? And by identifying the feeling that comes up that's common to all of the experiences, we can begin to identify what it is we might be holding on to. If I'm continually disappointed by people, maybe I have a pattern in me that's actually attached, like you were talking about letting go. It's actually attached to that feeling of being disappointed. And so I keep anticipating that that's going to happen, and then I do things, little things, which make that likely to happen. And then those synchronicities show up and put me on that branch of the tree where, once again, I'm disappointed, and it reinforces my own story.
Yeah, it sounds like what my mom used to call self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, I agree. So meaningful history selection is about how, of all the branches of the tree, which I would call histories, they're like how our life could go, how our histories could unfold. Of all those branches, the ones that align with what we're anticipating have apples growing on them. They're the ones that are heavier. And because of those apples, those branches become heavier, and so they have a higher probability of occurring. And anything that leads to those future apples of disappointment or of fulfillment, whatever it is that we're anticipating, events that lead to those things become more likely to happen because they lead to those outcomes. And so then we get a synchronicity or a coincidence, which seems like out of the blue, but it's actually leading towards an experience we're seeking to have. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sounds like we're just, what you're saying is we're a collection of our choices.
Yeah, and coming back to this question of right or wrong choices, what I took away from that investigation into my life is that there aren't right and wrong choices. That every choice I make leads to some kind of meaningful response from the universe. So or whatever you want to call it, the universe or the cosmos or just nature or our surroundings, our environment, it's responsive to us. The events that happen in life are not accidental, at least not all of them are, but are happening with as a response to the choices we're making. This isn't to say that everything we do is our fault or anything like that, and we could talk about that. But that everything we do leads to a response from the world around us in terms of what events come our way. And so there's not right or wrong. It's how are our choices aligned with what we really want in life?
So
what we're going to start thinking.
What's a good technique for cultivating this flow in our lives?
There's a process, an acronym I call the LORAX with a double R, LORRAX. The first step, L, is to listen. Listen to life.
But that's a tough one for me.
Yeah. Why is that? Tell me an example.
I don't know. I just have a tough time listening. I think it's because my brain starts going in other directions as soon as I start getting some information. I think it's a focusing. I think that as a person, I think I like to fill in the blanks before I've allowed the speaker to fill in the blanks, and I think that's a huge impediment to listening. Yeah,
interesting. And so listening can be a metaphor not just for actually listening to people, but listening to life and listening to circumstances. And what you're speaking to, Stephen, I think is the second step, which is opening. Mm. And a lot of times when we hear something or we have an experience in life, some obstacle like a car breaks down, we're not actually open to it. We're immediately jumping to conclusions or how to fix it or what we think it means. And that's likely going to lead us away from being in flow. So the second step we want to do, once we notice that an experience is happening, which we have a reaction to, that's the listening step, then we open our minds to, well, what am I thinking about this, and how could I possibly be wrong about it? There may be something I could, think about this differently. Mm-hmm. And that sets us up to be able to do the third step, which is to reflect. And this is the real power place. When a situation comes up that's especially obstacles in life, and we have the time and the space in our minds to reflect on it, we might start to see threads of life that are connecting in that experience, like ways in which this experience actually benefits us. But we can only do that if we reflect on it. So I can tell a quick story about this. I was giving a talk in Petaluma in the evening one day, a workshop, and it was towards a whole new audience. So I was a little bit nervous about the event and making sure I wanted to connect with everybody there and feel confident. But I had a really busy day where I was driving from the East Bay through traffic. I had to get my daughter to school and get up there. And so I had this really hectic morning. And I got up to Petaluma, and I had about 2 hours before my talk. And I thought, great, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to perfect my talk. I'm going to work on my slides. I'm going to practice my lines because I want to make sure I can connect with people. Or actually, I was thinking I want to make sure the talk goes really well. But then I turned on my car to just move it around the block, and I realized it was dead. My battery had died. So my initial response was, oh, my God, this is ridiculous. I can't believe it. I've got to work on my talk, and now I can't because I've got to call AAA, and I've got to get my car started. But after sitting with it long enough and doing this reflection step, first I listened to the situation. I opened my mind that maybe there was something about it that I wasn't interpreting correctly. And I reflected. And I realized that I was being forced to give up my plans and get really into the moment. And in that moment of trying to get help with my car, I ended up connecting with some people on the street. I ended up connecting with a person who was coming early to my workshop, and we had dinner together. And I ended up having about 5 or 6 people that I got to know before the workshop, so that when the workshop happened and these people actually came to the workshop, I was feeling really connected to them, and I was in a very different space than I had been. So by reflecting, I was able to see that really this was an opportunity to connect, and that's what I actually needed in order to get the experience I wanted to have at the workshop.
Pretty cool.
So that reflection step can really help us get around the obstacles in our life because we start to see that they line up with something that we want.
Yeah, I think that can be hard for people, to to take what at first glance feels, looks, smells like a negative, and be able to find the gold in it.
So far, everything you said, I'm finding difficult. And when I look at how I live my life, I'm more like listen, react, then open up and reflect. I sort of have, I have I have to have it twisted around, which is not the best thing in the world.
Well, that's why this is so. I mean, that's why I love doing this work, because it's constantly challenging me to change the way that I operate a little bit, to be ultimately more authentic and more in alignment with where I want to go in my life. And when I find I follow these processes, I find that my relationships end up being smoother and situations work out more in my favor. I do less self-sabotage.
Nice.
And there's this other 3 steps. After we reflect and we see, oh, this situation could actually help me in this particular way, sometimes I have to release. Like you were saying, being attached or releasing, surrendering.
Letting go, yeah.
Yeah, letting go. Because in the case of, like, I was supposed to be working on my slides for my presentation, I had to let go of that in order to actually have the experience that was going to get me where I wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an important piece of it. And once we've done those things, listen, open our minds, reflect, and release, then we can take action. That's the A step. And from there, the action is more likely to be in alignment with the circumstances that we're in. And the X is just a reminder to not give up, that this is a constant process. We might make mistakes, like you might do the reaction before you do the opening up, and it just gives you another chance to dive back in to listen to what happens next.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to take this opportunity to do our station break and let people know you're listening to Let's Talk on KWMR, 90.5 Point Reyes Station, 89.9 Bolinas, and 92.3 in the San Geronimo Valley. High-speed internet services for KWMR are underwritten by Horizon Cable. Cable casting KWMR on television channel 47 in Point Reyes Station, Olema, Inverness Park, Inverness, and Dillon Beach. Online at horizoncable.com. And KWMR is supported by Osmosis Day Spa Sanctuary, offering massages, organic facials, and the Japanese cedar enzyme bath. Located near the Sonoma coast, just up Highway 1, featuring 5 acres of gardens as well as local and organic meals. The spa menu, online booking, and information about the surrounding area can be found at osmosis.com or via kwmr.org's homepage. And if you'd like to call in, we're talking with Ron Nelson.
Sky
Nelson. I think I did that earlier. I said Ron Nelson. That's so funny. Sky Nelson about synchronicity and living in flow. And the number to call is 415-663-8492. All right. Thank you, Sky.
We're going to fit you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
There's more letters to the Lorax, though, right?
No, that's it. We did listen, open, reflect, release, act, and don't give up.
Oh, is that what the X is?
Yeah, the X.
Well, I've got another question.
Well, yeah, sure. And can I mention that this is part of the course that I'm putting together that will be released in the fall? All the tools I've talked about so far are part of this video course that's coming out, which is available online for people to take at their own pace. And I'm really excited about it because it's a chance to really dive deeply into the material that I opened up in the book and help people get through their blockages and start to see where synchronicity is actually helping them in their life and the next stepping stones for them, and how to dissolve the fears that come up as obstacles in their way of going for what they want.
Very good. Yeah, I think we all want to feel good in our lives, and having tools to help us is always a good thing.
You know, I like what you also said about attitude and outcome. You didn't use those words, but it seems you approach the world in a certain way, and the world returns that in a certain way. So I like that. I like that aspect of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there's a useful piece to that too, which is that if life is this branching tree of all the possibilities, and I'm attached to a specific apple on that tree, I'm sort of aiming for this one goal, and then something happens that gets in the way of that, like that one falls through, or I feel like somebody's in my way, by being obstinate or not giving me what I want. This actually points to a new way of dealing with that situation, which is that that's just one of the apples, and there's many apples on the tree at all times. So by following this process of the Lorax, or whatever other process you might have, you can begin to let go of the attachment to that particular apple, that particular situation, and keep working to get to some apple that satisfies whatever your need is. And it allows our relationships to be more spacious because we're not putting our own attachments to life on other people. We're seeing that our fulfillment, we can get fulfilled in lots of different ways, and it's not dependent on any particular person.
Mm-hmm.
I've got, I didn't have a chance to read the whole book, obviously, but I did have a chance to look over some things and glean some good ideas from it. But what I didn't get to, and what I'm hoping you can help me with, is what does this have to do with quantum mechanics?
Yeah. That's a good question, and that's what I'm spending my days doing, and why I'm so interested in it. So, and it's great to just try and open up that can of worms, and then people can either read the book or find more information on my website if they want to, really untangle it. But what quantum mechanics is the study of what things are doing when you're not watching. So we developed quantum mechanics to explain what we observed with, like, electrons and photons, which are particles of light, all these things at the microscopic level. And what we found, this is in the early 1900s, is that these things could not be described by a definite reality before an observation happened. An observation being like some interaction with a person doing the measurement, or a tool, some device that was doing the measurement. So what it ultimately leads to is that everything in the physical world is really about interactions. Things don't exist in and of themselves. They only exist in relationship to other things. And this is something that, you experience as a human, as a metaphor personally. Like, we end up defining who we are based on our relationships with other people and with our bank account and with our job. How we feel, who we think we are, is dependent on how we feel about our relationships with these things. Well, this same idea applies to, in a different way, but it applies to the physical world, that things actually only have reality in the interactions they have with other things. An electron doesn't exist in and of itself, only when it interacts with your measuring device, or a proton, or something else in the physical world.
I have a tough time with that.
So what this leads to...
I know.
To me, it seems like the proton's there, whether we know it or not.
Like, yeah, if the tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound if no one's there to hear it?
That's the question, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And what quantum mechanics says, if you apply it to macroscopic things like trees, which I argue and try hard to show that you can, but that's definitely controversial. But what that question then is saying is, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, it is in a state of fallen and also not fallen. Like, both are possibilities. And that's all we can say. We can't say that just because we're not there, it still happens. It's actually our observation, or our lack of observation of it, that leaves it in this state of possibilities. That's the most we can say about it.
Until we go and see that the tree's fallen.
Right. And then we get one reality or the other. Maybe it's fallen, maybe it hasn't fallen. And the key thing here is that, and this is why it's a Zen koan, right? Because thousands of years ago, people realized this was the truth of reality, and now we have the tools of quantum mechanics to model that. It's key to think about what's happening in the rest of the forest. The trees around that tree are impacted by the fall of that tree. So you'd think that they would be observing the tree, and they would know whether the tree fell or didn't fall.
So does tree falling, does that affect me then?
Well, it affects the other trees even if you're not there. And when you show up on the scene, then the tree having fallen affects you. And when it affects you, the other trees also fall into a particular state where they were affected by the tree too. So I like to think of life experience or physical situations as an ever-growing ring of correlations, circle of correlations, where things get correlated with each other. And when you and I interact, we have a definite reality between us, but everyone out there that's not listening to the show would describe us as just a set of possibilities. And then when someone tunes into the show, they suddenly are part of this reality that we're having, and there's this, relative to us, there's a coherent physical reality that we live in. And what that leads to is the possibility that unexpected things can happen that actually align with what you're choosing, because they didn't have a definite reality just a few minutes ago.
I'm noticing my face scrunching up, and I'm a little confused, but I think it's hard to separate. Okay, help me understand better this idea that your example of the trees. So my experience of the trees only happens when I show up in relationship with the trees, but the trees are doing their thing whether I'm there or not. So the trees still exist even though I'm not looking at them or touching them.
But from your point of view, those trees have a multiplicity of possibilities, multiple states that they could be in, and that's the really deep point that quantum mechanics, I think, makes in the world, is that the world is defined from your point of view, and when all you can say about the trees is that they exist as multiple possibilities. If you want to talk about the trees' point of view, you have to switch from your point of view to their point of view. And from the trees' point of view, you're the one that's in multiple possibilities. It's a real stretch from the way that we like to think about the world. We tend to think that there's an objective world out there that is also definite and has real things happening all the time. Mm-hmm. And what this science says is that that's an illusion, like the concept of Maya illusion from Eastern philosophy, that all that is actually definite is what you perceive, what you get information about. So when you turn on the news, that particular information you get about the news becomes part of your physical reality at that moment. And prior to that, it was in a superposition or a combination of possibilities.
Gosh, it's making me think maybe I shouldn't listen to the news because
it wouldn't be happening if you didn't hear it.
Yeah. So what happens if I decide I don't want to know about the news? Doesn't the news still happen?
Well, it unfolds in many different possible ways. And you putting your head in the sand doesn't mean it doesn't keep evolving. It just means that it doesn't. The way it ends up getting to you, the information gets to you some way at some point. Whether it's through somebody telling you about something that happened or whatever. It is tricky to talk about this stuff in a way that jives with what we're so familiar with in the world. So it doesn't tell us we should just tune out the world, but it also does tell us that the way that we take in the information matters. If we can take in the information from the news in a way that inspires us into action, then through this process of placing apples on the tree in meaningful history selection, we begin to influence the opportunities we have to make a difference.
This is what I'm getting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm getting that, number one, that physicists are way up there in terms of contemplation of the universe, number one, not just figuring out how waves work, but two, that what you're saying is that quantum mechanics really presents us a model. And if we follow the model in our own lives in terms of quantum mechanics, it can make a big difference because it gives us a way of looking at the things that are happening to us.
Yeah, I definitely believe both of those things. Yeah, I appreciate that. An example of this would be if I tuned out the news completely, I would not find out about what's going on with climate change, right? But doesn't mean climate change wouldn't be happening. I also wouldn't find out about the climate strike that's happening tomorrow on Friday around the world. People are taking the day off or striking from work and school in order to protest and fight for change on climate change. So the choice to engage with the world has given me the opportunity, the synchronistic opportunity, to go to my nearby UC Berkeley campus in the middle of the day with my daughter and have a wonderful experience. And I wouldn't have found out about that experience if I hadn't have tuned into the information I was getting from other parents at school to do this. So it's not that we just can tune out the world and have nothing happen to us. It's by engaging with the world and having an attitude that allows proactivity to emerge, we then get opportunities to make a difference in the world that we wouldn't have noticed otherwise.
Nice.
Those are synchronicities.
Very good. So it's going beyond just those happenstance moments like, wow, same place, same time, but more a broader picture of the whole, the whole experience of being alive in this world today, right now, and what that means.
Yeah, and I think we're so lucky to have so much information and so much possibility. We could do so many things on any given day. And the idea that we're actually developing a science of synchronicity at this time is so empowering to me, because we have, everything we do is meaningful in some way. Everything we do is like seeding the universe or the environment we live in with possibilities that ultimately come back and bring us to some experience we might want to have, some possible experience. Conversations we had a long time ago about having a conversation on KWMR have come to fruition now in this conversation here.
That's right.
That's a process of evolution, right, that was planted a while back.
That's right, because I thought about you joining us based on that phone call that you made to us about a subject that we were discussing. I can't remember what it was. I said, oh, Sky. But I thought about not calling that day. I debated, should I call in, should I not call in, but the whole branch of the future opened up from there. I want to know if there's a relativism to this. In other words, do we judge whether or not the synchronicity can be for bad or good?
That's a great question. The way that I ultimately talk about synchronicity is that no one can tell you whether your synchronicity is really a synchronicity. I can't say to my wife, well, did you notice that happened to you? And that's because you're not doing this enough. You should pay attention to that synchronicity because it's telling you a message that I'm trying to tell you too.
What a great idea. A whole new language.
I can't control other people's experience of their own synchronicities. Synchronicities are a language that the world around us uses to talk to us. And we're the only ones who can know what that language is and what that really means. I think that's really important. It's a very personal process.
Yeah.
Now,
so ultimately, there's a relativism to it, but what the deciding factor in the end is what the inner knowing inside of ourselves is telling us.
You're listening to Let's Talk on KWMR, and if you'd like to call in, there's just a few minutes left of this conversation with Sky Nelson about synchronicity and living in flow. The number to call is 415-663-8492. And MK, I know you're listening, but okay, you don't have to call in today if you don't want to. It's your choice. Choose your... So I wanted to tap back into this. I forget how you phrased it, Sky. Selective history or something like that?
Meaningful history selection.
Meaningful history selection. Can you talk a little more about that?
So what we were talking about earlier was that the physical world around us doesn't have an actual independent reality, independent of our interaction with it. And what this means is that, when you interact with somebody by accident, you walk out the door and there they are, you assume that they had a whole history of how they got to you, like a whole set of decisions they made to get to that point in their day where they happen to meet you. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, they did, but they did have a history. They did have a set of decisions they made because they're a human being and they have their perspective on the world. But from your perspective, that history is flexible. In other words, there's a lot of ways it could have happened, a lot of choices they could have made to get to wherever they're going to get to. And what this means is that if you don't have to be worried about, am I going to make the right choice to meet my life partner, or am I going to miss my destiny somehow by turning left instead of right down a hallway? If I walk out the door and I turn left, and 10 minutes later I find myself in the washroom, I might bump into, somebody I really need to meet. But if I go out the door and I decide not to do that and I go right and I go to my car, the histories of other people are flexible. And so a different history could fall into place that brings that person that I need to meet to my car, where we bump into each other there.
Well, isn't this, is this happening on the subconscious level? We're not thinking of our history all the time and how our, the flexibility of our history. I'll tell you a coincidence that happened to me, and I think you even referred to it. I was in Mexico, and we were traveling, plane change in Mexico City, and walking through a very, very busy area of the airport. And I looked at my wife and said, I only know one person that lives in Mexico, and his name is Jim Borzani. And I turned my head to the left, and I said, and there he is.
That's great.
I know.
Great.
So a couple of things come to my mind, though. Did I see Jim Borzani out of the side of my mind, and I wasn't aware of it, and so Jim Borzani came into my mind? That's a way of explaining it. Let's put it that way.
That's certainly a possibility. The way that this theory would describe that situation is that Jim Borzani was in a tree of many possibilities from your perspective. So instead of thinking of him as already there was it Mexico City that you were in?
Yeah.
Instead of thinking of him already where he was and you trying to tune into where he is and somehow either subconsciously or psychically, gaining information about where he is, what's actually happening in this model is that where he is actually a flexible fact. There's many different branches of the tree that could lead him to being in different places. And
he was traveling as well. So it wasn't like he was stationary. We were both moving together in order to bump into each other, so to speak.
Hey, guys, we have
his decision. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to know we have a caller. And so, caller, you're on the air. What's your name?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to hear from you.
Yeah.
This is MK.
I've been listening to you guys, and it's very interesting. I can just think of a couple of examples of synchronicity in my life, and both were very, very useful to me. And I think that for somebody like me, who tends to be rather unintellectual, is that I had to get to a really low point and give up and stop trying to direct my life and let it be directed by a force outside of me. And when that happened, I was on this incredibly clear path, and the choices that I made weren't even really choices. They were just, I followed a path that I could see, and it was clear, and it was right. I think you have to trust yourself, and it takes time to get to that point as human beings because there's so many contradictory things that go on, and you just have to, at one time or another, give in and give up and let it happen. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. There's religious ways and psychological ways and so on and so forth. Overthink, I think, is a big problem with people.
Yeah.
And what I hear you pointing to is, when you finally get to a point where your patterns are so frustrating and you realize, or for me, when I realized that I keep doing the same things and I can't manipulate the situation the way I want it to go. I've got to surrender.
Yep, surrender.
It gets that mental process out of the way. Those processes
right.
of how I'm controlling things.
It's like you can take a deep breath.
Yeah, and our own habits that get in the way of flow that's really the key, is that we're constantly actually getting in the way of synchronicities happening in our life.
Yeah, it's hard because people are so busy.
What you're describing is letting that go.
Yep. Anyway.
And you're relating it to busyness.
To what? Busyness?
To busyness. Like when we're really busy,
Well, sure.
it's hard.
Yeah, and I think that the information coming from all sides of us, if you're a person that takes in information, which I seem to be quite open and susceptible to that, is that you just can't. You get to a point where you can. I had to almost die to get to that point. I mean, physically be very, very sick, and then I realized I couldn't really go a whole lot lower, so I might as well go up. And then I just it just started to trust, and you realize that I was in my 60s, and I realized at that point how many better decisions you could have made if you'd just been able to let go. But it takes time. It takes time to get there. So
I can really
my
resonate
2 cents worth. Huh?
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Sure.
I can really resonate with that. The attachment that we hold on to of situations in life is part of what I think this process is trying to get us to let go of. Life has better plans, better ways that things can unfold, and that's what flow is about. It's a way of being in the world that allows us all to work together in a new way.
And it's hard to do if you're working really hard, doing full time and raising kids and carpooling and doing all this stuff. You just can't. You can't. It doesn't even have a chance.
I think it's hard to do anyway.
I do too.
Well, I think that it's more about raising the awareness about the situation, and then it can become easier.
Well, you have to open up and let it in, and you have to let the clutter out. You have to put the clutter away, and or have it be gone, or dismiss it, or whatever.
Well, I tell you, synchronistically, I'm taking in what you're talking about as very meaningful for me. It's a day when I need to clutter and be a little less busy and see what opportunities are right in front of me in order to act more smartly rather than just busily.
I'm looking around my bedroom, and it's so cluttered. Oh, my God. Okay.
I'm going to remind you about that cluttered mind next time you call in.
Oh, no.
Steve, I'm going to come down there and bop you.
Oh, no.
I'm coming down.
Yeah, we just play with each other.
Head for the hills. Okay, bye, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for calling, MK.
So, I have an example of a story that's a synchronicity. I went to grad school at San Francisco State a few years ago, and I was studying for an exam. This is statistical mechanics, which is a really hard class. And I hadn't studied everything, right? So it's like we're about 10 minutes before the exam, and we're all crammed in a room kind of just doing last-minute preparation with my fellow students. And I overhear someone say, did you study such and such? Because he said it's going to be on the exam. And I hadn't even thought about that topic. And the person wasn't even talking to me. But instead of being super busy and stressed out of what I was focusing on, I was able to take in that information and say, I better look up that thing he just talked about, that formula, fresh in my mind. And sure enough, I went into the exam 10 minutes later, and that was one of the first questions. So it's like if I had been too busy to pay attention and just focusing on the outline that I had to study from and not listen to what information is coming to me from the world around, I would have missed that part of it.
Yeah. Well, we need to wrap up our show, and thanks so much for calling in today, Sky. Really appreciate it.
One thing before we go,
pleasure.
Sky, you're coming up here. You've got some talks at the Dance Palace or whatever. What's happening with that?
Yeah, I'm working with Bonnie to set up an event at the Dance Palace in the spring, which will be a all-day workshop or half-day workshop on synchronicity and flow, where we dive into some exercises and some detailed information that you can integrate into your own life experience that helps you see synchronistic opportunities in front of you, not the ones that are in your head about the future, about what you want to do in the future, but the ones that are right in front of you today that are opportunities and methods of letting go of what's in your way of jumping on, creating the life that you want to create, starting to see some of the patterns that you might hold on to, like we talked about earlier with the recurring experiences that we have.
You want to give your website one more time?
Yeah, so I'm developing a course called the Living in Flow course, which will be available online in the middle of October and available at your own pace. You can take that course, slowly or quickly or whatever you like. Again, diving into much more depth about how to apply these ideas. And the website you can find me at is www.skynelson.com.
Great.
And you can sign up for my email list there, too, and stay in touch.
Sounds good, Sky.
Thanks an awful lot for being here.
And we'll be talking about something else next Thursday at noon. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks again, Sky.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Stay in flow.
Yeah.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.